Hey there, John with Fathercraft. Today we're talking kids, COVID, and pandemic parenting with Dr. Jacqueline Winkelmann, or Dr. Jacq. Dr. Jacq is a board-certified pediatrician who's a pediatric hospitalist and the former chief of staff at the Children's Hospital of Orange County. Right now, Dr. Jacq is the medical advisor at Miku, one of our favorite baby monitors. So thanks to the team at Miku for making this conversation possible. All right, let's get to it.
Well, I think we can transition to the kids during the pandemic section, and John's going to take point on asking these.
All right.
The first one is around kids during the school year. So basically, what's the impact on kids needing to stay home, and having to socially distance from kids, the friends and teachers, and what kind of impact can we expect with that?
Yeah, it's huge. And, after being on complete lockdown and then summer, not having had the traditional camps and schools and, the social interaction that's so important for kids, it's huge. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has made kind of a big push to encourage schools to have their safety protocols in place so that kids can go back, because it is the best thing for them physically, mentally, socially, emotionally, no doubt about it. Anxiety and depression are all-time high in kids and adolescents and adults, as a matter of fact. But certainly those ages are so vulnerable and they so depend on that social interaction. They're not used to Zoom. It's not, it just doesn't work for them the same way. So I think it is really important to try to go back to school safely, but certainly make that effort.
Right. And just, along those lines, I know there's a lot of focus on school-age kids, but, I have a 2-year-old, or he's going to be 3 in October, and his preschool is still closed. And, I feel like, this is a really formative time in his life. So along the same lines, are there, different ways to kind of mitigate that with different age groups? For the 3-year-old, that looks different than like an 8-year-old per se.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit later about pods and how to do that, because I feel like even some of the school districts that did not reopen in person this year, there are these groups of parents that have started these quote unquote micro schools. Even for the younger kids that don't even have an option. And so they're getting small groups together and a tutor or a parent or a teacher that will, facilitate, even if it's just their social interaction, like, for your child at that age. But it is important.
Is there any way to reassure parents who may potentially be freaked out about their kid being on screens for, 6 hours a day?
Yes, do not freak out. I have a freshman in high school that spends 6 or 7 hours in school in front of the computer, then 2 or 3 hours doing homework in front of the computer, and then his only way of socializing with his friends is gaming, which is on the computer. So despite the fact that as pediatricians and the American Academy of Pediatrics has talked so much about the dangers of screen time, this is very temporary. And this too shall pass. So it is okay. Now, a couple of things that you can do is get comfortable chair for your child. I mean, we have seen the effects, right? Kids complaining of headaches or red eyes or back pain even just from sitting. So comfortable chairs, make sure your child does take breaks from the computer and has some sort of physical exercise every day.
Are blue screen glasses a thing for kids? I know.
Yeah, my son wants one, but his school's actually going back in person on Tuesday, so we lucked out of that one. I don't think they're gonna hurt if your child is having some symptoms. There's also things you can do to your computer screen. Change that blue light to different types to kind of alleviate that extra strain on the eyes. But again, this is, knock on wood, hopefully not going to be forever. And so I feel like just making sure your kid has the breaks and activity and things like that will get them through this period.
How should we, as parents, thinking about kids going back to school, how should we start thinking about that?
So the decision to send your child to school or not, which is in many places that are even open for in-person an option, it's a very individual decision for each family. And of course, it depends on many factors, not just the obvious, do I have a high-risk person living in my house? Is my child high risk? Or do we live with 90-year-old grandma? How are the protocols for each school? How is the COVID situation in your school district? So all these factors are going to affect how you see it, but you also have to look at your child. And for example, my sister, who lives in Wisconsin, has a 10-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old daughter. The 10-year-old is dying without in-person school. Very social girl. She needs that interaction. She's done with the Zoom socializing. My 5-year-old niece is perfectly content being home and having mom all to herself. And she told her mom she does not need to go to school because she is her best friend, which is very cute, but my sister's dying. So, you have to weigh in not just your family situation, but each child individually. And again, if your child is not ready or needing it or wanting it, and you feel like it's an extra risk, then by all means. But if your child really needs that social interaction, then it's probably a good idea to evaluate, as long as the schools have their safety protocols in place and the COVID situation in your area is reasonable, then absolutely the best place in general for kids to be is in school. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think some of the schools have not reopened for that reason. It's not really because the risk is so high for children, but the risk is obviously higher for staff and teachers and administrators. So I think as a society, when we make a commitment, when we understand that what's best for children is to be in school, we also have to take on that social responsibility of what we do outside of school. I mean, we're seeing, right, the college students that are sort of, they were so excited to go back to school, but at the same time, there is that social contract that you have to behave outside of school. So I think for all of us parents that are in general wanting our kids to be back in school, we need to, make the commitment that it doesn't mean that once they're outside of that building, it's a free-for-all. So we need to do our part to sort of contain, the COVID spread in general, not just in the school.
What can we do to help our kids get a good night's rest during this period?
Yeah, I think kids are really good at watching us. And so I think modeling and being good role models for our kids is huge. So first is don't freak out, right, as a parent, because you don't want your kid freaking out and having nightmares and not being able to sleep because there's this, unknown germ that's roaming in our world. So, your own modeling, your own, spend time as a family, go for walks, have dinner, play games, watch movies, have your normal bedtime routine and have your normal bedtime. That's huge. I think, all of summer, the lockdown in the summer was kind of a free-for-all. There's nothing to do or nowhere to go. So I think we got a little lax with some of our routines and rules, all of us, adults and kids. So I think it's very good for kids thrive with structure. And so the more normal we can keep it at home for them, the more normal the behaviors that will follow, if that makes sense, including sleep.
Okay, great. So you touched on this just a minute ago about not freaking out. So how should we talk to our kids who may not understand, they understand there's a pandemic or they may not understand what that is, but there's something bad happening. How can we, talk to them about what actually is going on without, freaking them out?
Yeah, they know. They definitely know. They know something's up. They know mom and dad are home all the time. They, even the young ones know that something is different. And so I think it is really important to be honest with them, talk to them in language that they will understand. And the AAP actually has some really good resources. And I can definitely send you guys the link for your viewers. And healthychildren.org is the parent website of the AAP. It has a lot of good tools about how to talk to kids. I think this is a great time to revisit all of our hygiene protocols that we're always talking to little kids about, but stress the importance of hand washing and sneezing into your elbow and those kinds of things, especially now as flu season is about to start. It's good to have those conversations again. But, trying to keep things as normal as possible doesn't mean pretending nothing's going on. And again, kids are, they're hyper acute to when things are not the way that they're normally structured. So being transparent as a parent is always best.
So when it comes to masks, I know my 3-year-old will wear it for maybe 5 seconds at most. How effective are they really for kids? And is there an age that is absolutely necessary that they must wear a mask?
Yeah. The American Academy of Pediatrics, their official statement is that it is safe for children over 2 to wear a mask. That is way easier said than done, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that preschool age kid is not going to have it. So, however, I think masks aren't going to go away anytime soon. So, I think it is important to do our best to try to get them comfortable, just like they hated wearing helmets the first time or hated the seatbelt situation when, it's something that's just going to take time. And again, good resources on healthychildren.org, but a couple of the things that they recommend, you wear your mask with your child and stand in front of a mirror and just talk to them about whatever, just kind of normalize the whole thing. You put a mask on their favorite stuffed animal. You have them wear a mask with you while you're watching a show or while you're playing a game or doing it at home, so that they're just comfortable with the concept and not like every time I walk out my door, I have to put this thing on. Right. Scientifically, I don't think there's a ton of data. I mean, I think the data is mostly for adults, but again, it is our best defense for, like you said, for avoiding exposure to the grown-ups that they're around in school, in daycare, in preschool. So it is still worth trying. Now, I can tell you from my experience working with some of the school districts here, they don't require it for children under, I want to say it's first grade. Every school district is different and every private school has their own protocol. So yes, we understand that it's definitely harder the younger you are, but at the same time, there are little ways that you can make them get comfortable, because we don't know if your 3-year-old is, God forbid, 5 and we're still wearing masks. So, trying to get it to be something more normal like a helmet or a seatbelt is probably the best route.
It's almost like transitioning from diapers to regular underpants. Like, it's weird at first, but you got to normalize it somehow, right?
That's exactly right.
We've had a lot of stuffed animals with masks in our house.
Yeah.
Okay, so just going to revisit the earlier thought about pods. Do you have any thoughts on the safety of pod isolation?
Yes, I think pods are huge for our mental health and for socializing, for spending time with loved ones. And the concept of a pod, started out that it was your immediate family, right? The people that live in your household is your primary pod. And then, once the lockdown ended, then there was this concept that you could interact with 1 or 2 other families, especially if you have, younger children, that also practice, safe guidelines outside of their world. And the 3 of you as a family can interact without needing to necessarily be 6 feet apart or not wearing masks or that kind of thing. The concept of the pod worked out really well in New Zealand. In New Zealand, their pods were called bubbles. And again, in the lockdown, it was defined as their immediate household. And then once they got out, they were allowed, which was a little different from the guidance that we got, they were allowed to interact with a bigger bubble. And so that included some relatives that didn't live with them, or another family that they would interact with. And I think having even that permission psychologically to be with others without feeling like you're cheating or like you're doing something wrong, but at the same time being able to communicate. I mean, after the lockdown, everybody was done with Zooms. And, when the rest of your world was also in a Zoom, your work was in a Zoom, kids' games were in a Zoom, everything was in a Zoom, that it just doesn't fulfill the same need than the in-person interaction, and especially with children. So it's too difficult to have a play date where 2 3-year-olds are going to be 6 feet apart and wearing a mask. It is just unrealistic. But you also don't want to have a play date with a different child every week, because
Right.
each one of those children is having their own lives and their own households. So the concept of the pod, it just makes it more manageable, again, for mental health of the parents and the children.
Should kids be seeing their grandparents right now?
Just like with the decision to go back to school, I think it will depend greatly on what your grandparents' situation is. Their age, their health, their risk factors, the COVID situation, where you are and where they are. If they're local and and they can certainly be part of your pod. If they're not, for example, my husband actually just drove across the country to St. Louis after getting tested for COVID to see his parents. And same thing, I have heard of several friends that have gone to see their grandparents out of town. Everybody got tested before they left, and drive if at all possible. Grandparents are a huge part, especially of a child's life, and my children miss their grandparents. My parents live here, but they're pretty high risk, so we see them in our backyard with masks and not very often. So because our kids are now going back to school and the other ones in college, so there are situations that put us more of a higher risk for them. So, but if you have young grandparents that have absolutely no risk factors, they're probably no different than your neighbors or your friends as far as risk is concerned. So yes, make them part of your pod.
Oh, hey, just putting a mask on Calvin's teddy bear here. Well, panda bear to be exact, but I'll get back to it later. Thanks again to Dr. Jacq for sharing her tips and recommendations on parenting during the pandemic. If you want more of Dr. Jacq, we also talked to her about pregnancy and childbirth during COVID and about baby sleep. You can check out the links to both those videos below. And don't mask your enthusiasm. Like and subscribe. Thanks. We'll see you next time.